My name is Deb Van Dynen. I'm an Associate Professor of English Education at Hope College, and I have the honor of being the NEA Big Read and Little Read Lakeshore Director. The NEA Big Read Lakeshore and Little Read Lakeshore programs are month-long community-wide reading programs focused on the reading of a common book. This year, because of COVID, we've switched to a mostly virtual program. We're excited for the possibilities that this presents us as we can expand our audience's scope and reach, as well as our ability to connect with speakers and experts that are beyond our geographical reach. Thank you for joining us this year as we explore Nathaniel Philbrick's In the Heart of the Sea and Marcia Diane Arnold's Galapagos Girl, Galapagos. We hope you enjoy these events and learn lots about the book's topics and themes, as well as issues and important questions in our world today.
Hello, my name is Micheal Dyer. I'm the Curator of Maritime History here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and it's my pleasure to be working with the Big Read and Nathaniel Philbrick's Maritime History in the Heart of the Sea. I have several questions that I was asked to address, and those questions are, we would love to hear what you have to say about whales. Are there any kinds that are endangered? How can we help? How did whaling impact whales and their population? Was the behavior of the whale that sunk the Essex normal? And what was it like assisting Nathaniel Philbrick with research? What did it entail? Well, so I'll start with the last one first, because that's really where the story kind of begins. Nathaniel Philbrick is a uniquely talented author and historian with a true dedication to American maritime history. At the time of his writing, In the Heart of the Sea, he was the director of the Egan Maritime Institute, a museum dedicated to the history of the life-saving service out on Nantucket Island. And he had already written two critically acclaimed books, Abram's Eyes and Away Offshore, which were both colonial, pre-colonial histories of Nantucket Island. Of course, his father Thomas Philbrick was a pioneering author in American literary criticism, who took a look at American sea fiction and how it fit into understanding a more full understanding of the American experience in 19th century writing, pre-Melville, and he was also interested in Richard Henry Dana, and so between Thomas Philbrick's book, which came out in his first book, or his book on maritime fiction, which came out in 1961, and then Nathaniel Philbrick, his son later pursuing the same kind of maritime history and the American experience. Between the two of them, you see a kind of a developmental focus on the subject that's important. I think certainly important for people like me, who are in maritime history as a career, but I think important for Americans at large to read these books and to understand their why they were written in the first place. American maritime history is a very important part of our story, of our national story, and the Essex story that he focuses on was remarkable at the time. So as early as 1835, books came out. This is an 1835 copy here of the Mariner's Chronicle, published in New Haven, Connecticut, in 1834. It's a kind of a collection of narratives of the most remarkable disasters at sea: shipwrecks, storms, fires, famines, and naval engagements. And included in that was the wreck of the Essex. And so this sinking of a ship by a sperm whale was a really sort of a big deal, and remarkable at the time. Not surprising, I don't think, given the intensity of the American whaling experience that was going on. Philbrick, of course, was not the first, to tackle this subject. Tom Heffernan, Stove by a Whale, Owen Chase and the Essex, wrote his book in 1981. Heffernan is a Melville scholar, and his focus was really on the Essex story as a source for Melville, whereas I think Philbrick was really coming from this Nantucket historical perspective, using the really complicated details behind the entire development of the cruise of the Essex and its subsequent disaster as a way to look at the maritime culture of Nantucket at this time. The story really is multifaceted. It demands a comprehensive knowledge of Nantucket's commercial whaling with all it entails. This particular incident, covers human psychology, nautical and seafaring detail, marine mammal biology, specifically sperm whale anatomy and physiology, geography, the history of Pacific exploration, and the bibliography of these subjects. Published books play a very important role in the unfolding of events in the Pacific at the time. So when Nat was researching the book, I was the librarian and the curator of maritime history at the Bedford Whaling Museum in Sharon, Massachusetts. That museum was founded in 1956, and it was entirely devoted to collecting, exhibiting, and interpreting whaling history worldwide. And it closed down in 2000 when one of the principal trustees passed away. But the collections, included a great deal of natural history. Whales and whaling are intimately tied throughout history, and so collecting natural history books was part of collecting whaling history. But the bulk of the collection included scrimshaw, logbooks and journals, manuscripts, rare books, paintings and prints, and Yankee whaling harpoons and hardware, and it's one of the greatest collections in the world. So, so when people like Nathaniel Philbrick are doing their research, the Bedford Whaling Museum was a necessary stop in the process. At the time, like I said, I was the librarian, and the first thing that Nathaniel Philbrick asked when he came into the library was, he said that he was looking for a copy of a book that he couldn't find anywhere. He said that he was looking for a copy of Richard Henry Dana's Seaman's Friend, and could I help him with a copy of Dana's Seaman's Friend? And I said, yes, I have Dana's Seaman's Friend right here on my shelf. I use it every day in my work. And this is the very copy that I took down and gave to Nat for his work, for his research. And it was a really pretty astonishing moment for him. It was a gratifying moment for me because I knew I was doing something right, but it was an astonishing moment for him because he had apparently had a hard time finding this book, which was first published, in Boston in 1845. Richard Henry Dana, he wrote 2 years before the mast, which is a nonfiction account of his time spent as a volunteer sailor on a Boston hide drogger on the coast of California in the late 1830s, and his experience in the merchant marine as a sailor before the mast caused him to take a really serious look at the reform of the treatment of American sailors in the American merchant marine. And so, his book 2 years before the mast is a classic, and then later he wrote the Seaman's Friend, which is a breakdown of all of the responsibilities of individuals on shipboard in the merchant marine. It's a breakdown as well of nautical terminology, of shipboard management, and so it's a great reference source, obviously, which is why I keep it right here at my desk, and obviously something that Nat felt was important for his own research. So that's what it was like, to work with Nathaniel Philbrick. He came to the Bedford Whaling Museum to use the resources, and he spent the rest of the day, I think, looking at logbooks and journals and other resources of whaling in the Pacific in the 1820s, 18 teens and 20s. But in regards to, let's see, in regards to this question, was the behavior of the whale that sunk the Essex normal? That's a question I feel it's impossible to answer because there were millions of sperm whales in the seas. These animals are extremely intelligent. They have large brains. They according to the most recent sort of research conducted by, Hal Whitehead, wrote this, fantastic book, Sperm Whales, Social Evolution in the Ocean. Hal Whitehead's thesis, his idea that he's spent years developing, studying sperm whales in their habitat, is that these animals have social culture, that they have family units, and that there are complex relationships in the social structures of these family units that span the globe. Such a notion, I think, does not dispel, rather it would encourage the idea that that animals being attacked may well retaliate. And we certainly know, hunters know for a certainty, and it's legendary how tricky and dangerous a wounded Cape buffalo is. So if you can kill a Cape buffalo, that's good. If you wound a Cape buffalo, you're in as much trouble as the animal is, because they will track you down, and they're very, very tricky. And sperm whales have gigantic brains, and they are individually, any animal individually could react in any way. And so I can't say for certain whether such a reaction is normal. I would call it normal myself. I would say, that most people that were persecuted relentlessly would occasionally rise up and attack their persecutors. In November of 1820, when the Essex was sunk, there were at least 110 whale ships from half a dozen New England seaports in the Pacific Ocean, and these ships had rounded Cape Horn in the 1790s, and Yankee whalers and British sperm whalers began exploiting the oceans. The Pacific Ocean, off the coast of Peru, off the coast of Chile, further north off the coast of Japan, along the equator, along the Galapagos Islands, and they were targeting sperm whales extensively, and they targeted females and calves as well as bulls, and any sperm whale that they could catch and kill and boil out the sperm city, boil out the blubber, save the oil, and take it home to market. This was an industry, and in this particular region of the world, between 1804 and 1821, there are approximately anywhere between 3,000 and 15,000 sperm whales had been harvested from this region. So a socially gregarious creature like a sperm whale, facing an attack like that may well have produced some sort of behavioral response, and so I wouldn't be surprised at all if one could classify the attack of the Essex by a bull sperm whale as normal. nonetheless, ideas do vary extensively among researchers as to whether this was accidental or intentional on the part of the animal. But Whitehead's work, which is really, I think, would be really, it is in fact an important text to digest in attempting to answer this question. Could be a nice addition to your reading list. I mean, I know for certain that Yankee whalers encountered what they termed ugly whales. In Moby Dick, what was it? Who was it? Captain Peleg's assessment of Moby Dick the whale. Quote unquote, the monstrousest parmacity that ever chipped a boat. The monstrousest parmacity that ever chipped a boat. The implication here is that Melville's manipulation of the language and usage of the whale fishery, there were aggressive sperm whales in the sea, and we know that for a fact. I mean, the Essex wasn't the only whale ship that was attacked and sunk, and ugly whales were just a part of a common part of whaling. Here's a whaleman's illustration from this book, O'er the Wide and Trackless Sea, that I wrote in 2017. It includes an illustration of a big sperm whale attacking and sinking two whaleboats. And this was in the same part, this is in the offshore ground, this is in the same part of the ocean. Where the Essex was attacked and sank, and we're in the same part of the ocean where the Anne Alexander was attacked and sank in the offshore grounds. These ugly whales were just a common part of the fishery. So I don't know whether that gets to the bottom of the question of whether the behavior was normal or not, but it was certainly not uncommon. Now, as far as the next question goes, let's see. How did whaling impact whales and their population? And are there any kinds that are in danger? So, one of the first evidence, chunks of evidence that we have that whaling, commercial whaling, really did reduce a population of whales was in the 17th century with the intense Dutch, British, German, Danish whaling efforts around the island of Spitsbergen in the high Arctic, where between about 1617 and excuse me, and about 1670, these whalers wiped out the population of bowhead whales around that island, to the extent that there were no more whales encountered there. This was the foundation of commercial whaling. It was pursued so intensely that they wiped out the population of the animals and had to move on to the east coast of Greenland, to the open waters of Davis Strait, and into the eastern Arctic. And so that was the very first instance where commercial whaling all but eradicated a population of whales. The the most common notion that we hear over and over again is this idea about the right whale to hunt, and then we commonly hear about the Basques, hunting these animals, these right whales, and then colonists, American colonists, hunting these right whales and wiping them out. That's a kind of a flawed narrative in many respects. These animals, the black whale of the Americans, which is the same black whale of the Basques, had a relatively small population, and these animals were very easily targeted because they pursued a migratory path, a predictable path. So many animals around the world pursue a predictable migratory path. Gray whales, for instance, will migrate up the coast of California into around Kodiak Island in the North Pacific, maybe westward into the Bering Straits, or even further west into the Sea of Irkutsk, and then come back. And so these animals that pursue a migratory path were very easily targeted, and their populations were really damaged. And in the case of the gray whale, the population was almost completely eradicated because American whalers targeted calves, calving mothers, and calves around the waters of Baja California. So, you know, the whalers would move into the Sea of Cortez and around Baja, and target these animals as they came onto their calving grounds and just kill them. And so, you know, it was this is not the way to conserve a population of whales. You know, killing females and calves. The same can be said for sperm whales, although I'm not 100% sure that the sperm whale population was ever really endangered through the efforts of the Yankee whalers. The black whales on the coast of North America were definitely damaged by colonial whaling. Whatever small population of animals there were heavily damaged, and then larger populations of black whales in the southern hemisphere, especially with a migratory path around New Zealand and around the coasts of Australia. Those animals were heavily targeted, and their population suffered damage as well. Black whales in the North Pacific were heavily targeted. These were big animals, 300 barrels of oil, you know, sheets of baleen, 12 feet long, and very valuable. And Yankee whalers targeted them from the mid 1830s right up until the middle of the 1850s, the northwest coast ground. And then in the 20th century, and this is relatively recent research that has come to light in the last dozen years or so, Soviet commercial whalers almost wiped out the population of Eubelina japonica, the black whale of the North Pacific, and that between the two, between the black whale of the North Atlantic and the black whale of the North Pacific, these animals are highly endangered. They're the most highly endangered whales on the planet, so that's what can we do? You know, that was one of the questions, you know, that asked, you know, how can we help? Well, today we don't really hunt whales on purpose much, a little bit around the world, but we do damage to the oceans, and we do damage to whale habitats. The oceans are polluted with plastic and other garbage that's generated by people. There's incredible noise. Some of it is accidental noise, like shipping. Others is purposeful noise, like undersea sonar testing that damages the brains and ears and hearing apparatus of these animals. Their anatomy is damaged by sonar testing. There's fishing gear that's suspended for hunting lobsters and other marine life, and these animals get tangled up in the fishing gear, and they die slow, horrible, painful, gangrenous, infested deaths. They're not killed and processed the way whalers would kill and process an animal. They drag fishing gear around until their wounds are infested and they die of gangrene poisoning. And so there's a lot we can do. We could take climate change seriously, because the habitat changes in the ocean are doing whale populations no good at all. We can take pollution very, very seriously as well. And these are things that individuals can do. So you, every individual watching this program, cannot throw your trash on the ground and put it in a garbage can. You don't throw your plastic straws. You don't throw your water bottles. You don't throw your face masks on the ground. You put it into a garbage can because otherwise it'll wind up in the sea. So there are things that we can do. And let's see, what was last? Let's see, help whaling impact whales. So I think, let's see, sort of in conclusion, let's see. Yeah, I've covered this. The biggest threat to whales are habitat loss, pollution, accidental human encounters, entanglements with fishing gear, ship strikes. So ships will hit and kill whales. Sonar testing, and other stresses to habitats, which lead to increased mortality. Oh, and important, stressed animals have decreased fertility as well. So mothers will have fewer babies in a stressed habitat. So as we know, oceans are the thermostats of the planet and largely regulate the quality of life on land as well as on the sea. And it's important, it impinges on us to mitigate these threats to whale populations. So those are the questions that I was asked to address, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or address any of these subjects personally in the upcoming Q&A. So again, my name is Micheal Dyer. I'm here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. It's been my real pleasure to work with you on the big read and talk about Nathaniel Philbrick's book, In the Heart of the Sea. Thank you all very much.
Hello. I want to start out by saying welcome to our readers, and thank you for joining us for tonight's event, Behind the Book, Researching with Nathaniel Philbrick by Micheal Dyer. I want to start by introducing myself. I'm Abby Canoner, and I'm the Communications Manager for the NEA Big Read Lakeshore. We are so excited to host Micheal Dyer from the New Bedford Whaling Museum today. And Micheal, I want to thank you for preparing such an amazing presentation. I had no idea that there was a debate about whether the behavior of the whale that sunk the Essex was accidental or intentional. I did not know that. All right, so we're now going to transition into a time of Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments section. And I want to begin by asking you this question, Micheal. You mentioned earlier when we were chatting backstage that there has been a decrease in the interest of younger people in the whaling and maritime history field. What was it that sparked your interest in the field? And how do we get more people interested in that field of interest?
Well, when I was 14 years old, I went to, in the middle of the summer, I went to York Suburban Junior High School library to get a book to read. And I was looking at the shelves, and I found 2 Years Before the Mast by Richard Henry Dana Jr., and I took it home and read it. And I was 14, and I read it, and I was completely absorbed in this narrative. It was absolutely fascinating to me. Now, I'm in York, Pennsylvania. The sea is many, many, many hours away. So nonetheless, my mother and my mom and my dad loved New England, and we would vacation on Cape Cod and Maine, and we went to, we visited Mystic Seaport, and we spent, many, many days out on Cape Cod at Provincetown and the Peabody Museum in Salem and places like that. And so I began to wonder why it was that I wasn't learning anything about the maritime story, America's maritime story. I could go to the library and get books and read them, and I did, and it was very, very interesting. But it wasn't something that was part of my education forever, at any point. And so I wondered about that, and began looking into it a bit more, and around the same, after I graduated from college, I studied American history in college, the Cold War, not maritime history. I studied the Cold War and the election of 1948. But I took a job at the local historical society in York, PA, the Gates House and Plow Tavern, and that was very interesting. And after college, I moved to New England, and I took a job at a maritime museum there by accident. My car broke down, and I had to walk past this place. I was carrying my Volvo alternator. It was like a 6-mile walk, and I had walked past this museum, and I was dog tired, and I needed a job, and I stuck my head in the door and asked them if they needed any help, and the lady said, "You're our new curator." And I said, "Great, what's a curator?" And that was that. And from that point on, I really did want to pursue maritime museums as a career, and whaling in particular, because and this is a fact. You go into a bookstore, and you'll see 75 or 100 books on the Civil War, and you'll see 2 on maritime history if you're lucky, and maybe 6, and 5 of those will be about the Navy, and the other 2 will be about something else. But there's a wide open field of endeavor that's worth pursuing, because we're looking at climate change. The ocean's going to be coming into our front yard. It's going to be good to know how people dealt with it in the past, and to be able to think critically about how to handle that in the future. Not to mention that the subjects that we covered in the talk, species and the health of the sea. You can do it from science. You can do it science-based, and there's nothing better than pursuing a science-based education. You can do it from history, because there's an awful lot to learn.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of different opportunities within that field. Our next question.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Our next question comes from Lindsay Bites. She asks, were there any whale ships in the Great Lakes?
There was one whale ship in the Great Lakes, and it was the ship contest, and it was actually the ship Charles Phelps of New London that sailed to New Bedford, and was refitted for the Chicago World's Fair. And so they outfitted the Charles Phelps, and they changed her name to the contest, and they shipped her up the St. Lawrence River and up and around and onto the Great Lakes and into Chicago, and there she sat for the World's Fair. And I believe that there's either a book that's out or it's coming out on this subject. There's a fellow who has recently done some real digging and some real interesting research into the Great Lakes whaler. So there is one.
That's very interesting. I'll definitely look into that so we can share that book with our readers. All right, the next question I have for you is, we know from In the Heart of the Sea that whale oil comes from the blubber. Did whalers discard the remains of the whale after they were done with harvesting the whale oil? Or were there any other parts that were harvested? In other words, did whalers use all the parts of the whale, or were their eyes simply fixed on the oil?
So, two parts to this question. Very interesting dichotomy. Yankee whalers were interested in whalebone, baleen in the mouths of the various right and bowhead whales and black whales. The blubber from those animals, which was whale oil. So whale oil and whale bone came from the various right whales, as they called, or as I call them, black whales, and bowhead whales. Spermaceti and sperm oil came from the sperm whale. Spermaceti is this liquid material that's in the giant nose of these deep diving predators, and the sperm oil was boiled out of the blubber. There was periodically, but insignificantly, a small market for the ivory teeth of sperm whales. But whalers kept the teeth and did all sorts of stuff with them, and kept the lower jaw of the sperm whale and did all sorts of stuff with that too, scrimshaw and tool making and whatnot. But in the Yankee whale fishery, the main products were whale bone, baleen, whale oil, and sperm oil. When you look at the records, the sperm oil in bulk is not broken down between body oil and head matter. So that's real whaling history stuff. You know, when you're dealing with the manuscripts, you're going to see, you know, lists where it'll say H, B, and W. And the H is head matter, is spermaceti. The B is body blubber from sperm whales, and the W is all the whale oil. And whale oil can be from anything. So blackfish, you know, right whales, humpback whales, seals, anything that made oil would be thrown into the whale oil category. And what if you really wanted to lose your job fast in the whale fishery, you would top off a cask of sperm oil with some whale oil to get it to the top. And if you did that, and the owners found out about it, you're done, because that's, you know, sperm oil was the great product, the great valuable product. It's unique in nature, and it has properties that are unique in nature, and it was very, very valuable. And so those were always kept separate: whale oil and spermaceti. So spermaceti was used to make candles. It was beautiful wax, made beautiful candles, very valuable candles, especially in the early years of the American whale fishery, in the colonial era, in the 18th century, and then right up till the time of the Civil War.
All right, thank you for that answer. Our next question comes from Deb Van Dynen. She asks, what does a curator do? How would you describe the work you get to do at the New Bedford Whaling Museum?
Well, that's I had a boss once who described being a museum curator as being a glorified janitor, but that's a little flippant. You know, we build the collection, so you know we work with donors, we gain funds and however we can in order to acquire, you know, pieces for the collection. We put objects on exhibit, and so we create exhibits so that, you know, the people can have a great experience in a museum. They come to see stuff. They see interesting stuff. They want to see beautiful paintings. They want to see ships and boats, antique boats. They want to see ship models. They want to see scrimshaw. And you know, curators work with these collections for years at a time and develop ideas about them and put those ideas into an exhibition. Sometimes it depends on the museum where you work. There's some sort of a core narrative to the institution. So say you work in a historical society and your core narrative is cotton textile production in the 1880s. And so, you know, you're going to put together an exhibition that's going to have, you know, it's going to have cotton, raw cotton. It's going to have spun cotton. It's going to have looms in it. It's going to have, you know, descriptions of the working conditions and who worked in the mills, and you're going to get into all kinds of questions of labor and all kinds of interesting things. So, you know, working in a museum, you know, I have to hang shows. So a big part of my job is the actual installation of an exhibition, and that might be 50 or 60 paintings, a couple or three ship models. Some of these paintings are enormous. I mean, some of these paintings, you know, it takes a forklift to lift these things. And so, you know, it demands some engineering. It demands some real, you know, you really got to care about what you're doing. If you don't have a respect for material culture, then don't go into museum work. You got to care about it, and you got to care about the public who's going to come see it. So, you know, preservation is a huge part of the job. You know, their entire profession, you know, conservators preserve take care of the long-term preservation of wood and paint and cloth and metals of various kinds, and it's an endlessly fascinating field. You're never going to get rich doing it, so don't even imagine that. You actually have to raise money. You have to raise the money to do the job that you're doing. So there's that, it's a real challenge. But at the same time, I see amazing things, and it's a wonderful opportunity. Being a whaling history curator is really interesting because of all the scrimshaw that comes along. And these whalemen, they didn't just draw pictures of ships and whales on sperm whale teeth. They drew all kinds of bizarre stuff, and it's a kind of it's detective work, to figure out what this thing is that you're looking at. What is this picture? What does it mean? What did this mean to this individual? They spent hours, scratching this picture into a solid piece of whale's tooth ivory. It had to mean something to them. And then there's the entire, relationship between the men on shipboard and their families back home, material culture relating to that. There's endless, bottomless manuscripts dealing with everything from business to poetry to the logbooks and journals and letters, correspondence between owners and dealing with selling of cargoes of oil and some lonely guy in Tahiti who's writing home to his mom saying he misses her pie. This is working in a museum can be a very, very fulfilling job.
Well, that definitely has made me want to visit the New Bedford Whaling Museum, just hearing about all the work that goes into the different expeditions. Jacob Van Dynen asks, what are some of the highlights of the New Bedford Whaling Museum?
Okay, well, the New Bedford Whaling Museum has the largest ship model in the world, the model of the Barca Lagoda of New Bedford. It was built inside the Bourne Building in 1916, and it's 90 feet long. It's a half-scale model of a Yankee whaler. So it's the largest ship model in the world. We have the largest collection of logbooks, American whaling logbooks and journals in the world. I think we're at about 2,500 volumes, which numbers some 5,000 voyages. We have the world's the best and largest collection of scrimshaw in the world. That's engraved teeth and tusks.
Looks like it's a little frozen.
It's just a panoply of stuff. Plus, at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, which is, was originally the old Dartmouth Historical Society, our collections are also focused on local artists. And because New Bedford was a wealthy city, it really it drew the arts. So Albert Bierstadt came from New Bedford. Albert Pinkham Ryder came from New Bedford. William Bradford came from New Bedford. Charles Henry Gifford came from New Bedford. Robert Swain Gifford, our Swain Gifford, came from New Bedford. And so, we're building these collections. Our collection of William Bradford paintings is, it's second to none. It's when people do work on William Bradford, they come to the New Bedford Whaling Museum. So there are some really, plus with the addition of the Kendall collection in 2001, now it's the largest collection of Dutch paintings in North America, and Japanese watercolor scrolls as well. So it's quite a lot to quite a lot to see and enjoy.
Well, I think the first expedition I'll visit on my trip up there is that whale ship you're talking about.
The Lagoda.
Yes.
All right. You can walk on board.
Really? That is actually very fascinating. All right, Lindsay Lane asks, why do you think there is so little interest in maritime history?
Well, Lindsay, I wish I knew the answer to that. It's never been a focus. It's just not a focus. And I don't understand why, because you can't understand the American Revolution without understanding the maritime underpinnings of the colonial economy. Can't do it. You can't understand the American Civil War without understanding the commercial underpinnings of the Eastern Seaboard and the way they worked with the South. If the state of Hawaii and the state of Alaska came into the Union because of the whale fishery. California came into the Union almost because of maritime. It came into the Union because of gold, but the maritime the entire clipper ship era. I mean, the whole reason the clipper ships were built was so that you could get the mail and you could get stuff as fast as humanly possible from New York to San Francisco and from San Francisco to Hong Kong, and from Hong Kong to Liverpool, and from Liverpool back to New York, and then back to San Francisco again. I mean, I don't understand exactly how the narrative of our national history has become so terrestrially focused, because before the Civil War, the United States was a maritime nation. Almost the entire economy was driven by coastal and overseas trade, and what does that mean? What does that mean for New Orleans? What does it mean for Charleston, Savannah, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, New London, New Bedford? Can you believe it? In 1845, New Bedford, Massachusetts, this is really funny, was the fourth largest seaport in the United States, behind New York, Boston, and New Orleans. Was New Bedford, Massachusetts, by tonnage, because of the whale fishery, because of the number of ships in the whale fishery. But if you really start to look at the maritime affairs of nations, the East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, the entire sun never sets on the British Empire question. These are maritime nations that have defined the world we live in. And so it would behoove us to really fully come to grips. Australia is a place, for white people. Why? Because of ships. That's why. It's a maritime story, and much the same with with Chile and Peru and Rio de Janeiro. These major seaports where the entire story is pinned to the ocean, and there's a lot of culture involved in that, and there's a lot of politics and a lot of economics, and so I think that I would personally really like to see the opportunity for students in colleges and universities to be able to pursue 3, 6, or 9 credits of maritime history, in a humanities degree, a liberal arts degree. I think it would be a very, very important thing for us as a people to understand these stories.
Yeah, a maritime course would be very interesting to take, as I am a lover of history, so that'd be fascinating. So you mentioned briefly with that last question, some things about the different countries. So I want to ask, why did whaling practices vary based on the region or country of the whalers? What is the same? What is different?
Well, let's see. Western Europeans and Americans largely depended upon double-ended whaleboats and iron and steel tools. So Americans in the early 18th century invented the shipboard try-works, which was a furnace that was built on the deck of the ship, where you could with 2 big iron pots, and you build a fire under the pots, and you kill your whale, You drag it alongside the ship, you peel all the blubber off, you chop it up into pieces, build a fire in the furnace and throw the blubber in the pots and boil out the oil. Then you take that oil and cool it down and put it into a wooden cask and put the cask in the hold of the ship. So it's a factory. It's a factory ship. In 1770, there were these floating factories out there in the Atlantic Ocean in the South Atlantic. Harpoons looked pretty much alike. They were made out of wrought iron. They were they were arrow shaped, and then over time that there were various different kinds of harpoons that came into use as technology improved. Until the late 1840s, when a blacksmith in New Bedford, Lewis Temple, developed a toggling harpoon head that would lock under the blubber and wouldn't pull out. The development of the shift from the use of hemp to the use of manila in making whale line really did transform the industry as well, because that manila is much, much better for that application than hemp was. And so between toggling harpoons, hemp line, and some subtle refinements in the way that whale boats were built, combined with an ever increasing knowledge of cartography and better navigating instruments as time went on. So, by the 1890s, the cartography of the oceans was superb, and the navigating instruments were superb as well, and so navigation was that much easier. Now, you asked about other cultures. This is not the same as the way Eskimos hunt whales. So the Inuit on the north coast, on the north slope of Alaska, have a very, very different way of doing things. They don't use manila. They didn't. Now, this is pre-contact. So traditionally, going back 5,000 years, these people used ivory and bone toggling harpoons with long lines that was made out of walrus hide. So you'd take your walrus, kill your walrus and peel the hide off, and then you split the hide, because walrus hide is like 4 inches thick, and you just split it and lay it out flat, and then starting in the circle of the hide, you cut a spiral the whole way out, and then that winds up with a long, tough piece of rawhide, and that was the line that the Arctic peoples used to hunt walruses and seals and whales. They built their boats out of skin, and they were extremely effective. So these are extremely effective techniques for hunting bowhead whales in the Arctic. Japanese had a completely different. They're a completely different way of doing things in Japan. About 1685 or so, I forget the man's name, developed a technique of using nets. So entire communities, once whales were seen from a promontory, oh, there goes a whale, everybody would drop what they're doing, they'd run down, and everybody had a place, and they knew what they were doing. So they would be chaser boats with harpoons in them, and then there would be net boats. And the guys in the net boats would go, they'd load their nets into the boats, and they'd go out there, and they'd head off the whale, and they'd string a net across the sea, and the whale would swim into the net and get bogged down, and then the guys with the harpoons would come along, and they'd stab it to death, and they'd drag it back to shore, and they would process the entire whale. This gets back to your earlier question, which I never completely answered, and that was Yankee whalers threw the carcass away after everything was stripped off. So that earlier question you were asking about what were the products and what did they do with the carcass, they threw the carcass away. Yankee whalers did not eat whale meat. Modern whalers in the 20th century used the entire whale. So they would drag a whale up onto a factory ship and use everything. All the guts would be ground up, the bones would be ground up into meal, all the blubber would be boiled down into oil. So these are completely different effects on the sea. The Yankee whale fishery added biomass to the ocean with these carcasses of the whales. Modern whaling removed entire biomass from the sea, completely removed it. So there were different effects. You know, people who hunt whales for food and people who hunt whales for commerce are two entirely different cultures. You know, the fact of the matter is that they both hunt whales, so we're interested in that, and all the various techniques that different people around the world use to hunt whales are all very interesting. The Azorians, for instance, developed. They followed the path of Yankee whalers. They used double-ended whaleboats, but they refined their whaleboats and they added an extra guy. So they had 7 guys in their boat, and their boats were very long and very thin, and they had enormous sails, and they were super fast. And they hunted sperm whales exclusively. You know, the Azores are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's just a volcano that sticks up out of the sea, and there's sperm whales all around there, and you can stand on the shore and watch them swim by. And you know, these guys they developed a towboat. So the great contribution of Azorian culture to whaling is the towboat, which was a diesel-powered, extremely powerful, small boat, and they would tow a whole string of whaleboats out to where the sperm whales were, and then let them go. And the whaleboats would chase them around and kill the whales, and then the towboats would tow the dead whales back for processing at shore stations on shore. So, you know, there's a lot to talk about. We could talk about this for many hours.
Yeah, it seems like it varies quite a bit. There's a lot of small details that I had no idea made a difference. All right, our last question comes from Kaylee McKee. She asks, in your opinion, what is the coolest thing about the Nantucket culture? I guess I'm impartial to this question because of our book, In the Heart of the Sea.
What's the coolest thing about Nantucket culture? Well, I guess, you know, I always like that passage in Moby Dick, you know, where he describes Nantucketers as you know, setting forth from their anthill in the sea to go all around the world and hunt sperm whales. And I love that you know, that idea of you know, Nantucket being an anthill in the sea from which, you know, all these people, all these whalers would just, you know, pour off of the place and go out and hunt whales. You know, that is a pretty interesting thing. I think just the insularity itself of Nantucket is, you know, if you think about it, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, Long Island. You know, these are pretty old islands in American history, and there aren't many islands really in American history. And the entire culture that developed around, you know, Nantucket in the 18th century and into the early 19th century, I find the whole maritime culture out there to be pretty fascinating. The coolest thing, I think, is just walking around the town, because it's ancient. I mean, the houses and the buildings are very, very old, and you really, really do get a sense of something real when you're walking around Nantucket.
Yeah, that town does have a lot of history to it. All right, and that will conclude our Q&A section. Thank you, Michael, for your thoughtful and insightful answers. Your expertise on this topic just continues to amaze me. And our readers for amazing questions. And a few reminders before we go. We have 2 more full weeks packed with events. So if you have not already, go to our website, creedlakeshore.com, and you can view all of our events and register for them. And tonight we still have one more event at 8 o'clock. So make sure you tune into that. You can find that on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for coming today, guys.